yeah, like over the last 20 years or so, there's been a handful of studies on elk in the Rocky Mountain Trench, either collaring different populations of elk to see where they go, or doing surveys to see the distribution of elk. And yeah, I mean, the agricultural conflict has been a primary push for a lot of that work and lack of migratory behavior. And there's been work out in the Elk Valley as well more recently, looking at kind of similar trends, looking at migration patterns between elk and Alberta and the mines, and just sort of how elk are distributed across the landscape and what's sort of killing them and helping them survive, and what makes the landscape viable for elk or not. Like, there are fewer elk that are migrating, but there's also just fewer elk. So it doesn't mean like the total number of elk that are in the valley that are not migratory may or may not be actually going up, because the population's going down and the proportion that are not migrating is going up, and it could come out in the wash. But there's no question that like the people that have, you know, agricultural land are feeling the pressure of those elk, and especially the people that do not have a high fence, because the folks that got a high fence then don't share the burden of those elk, and it disproportionately ends up on the people who do not have a high fence. So, you know, there are grizzly bears, wolves, and cougars in every inch of this landscape, and that is something that those elk obviously also perceive. And those predators also avoid farms and people and towns as well. You know, they're in the trench proper, but they do avoid at a close proximity these big open areas where they can get shot, because they have been and contemporarily do get shot when they're standing out in the open, especially wolves and cougars. And so there is that piece. Like, there's a safety piece from the elk's perspective, safety from predators, safety from hunters, and then food. And things like coal mines and agricultural fields share that, both those attributes. And those are two of the places we see elk congregating incredibly heavily in the last 15, 20 years. And in new ways, like, you know, like you say, these are unprecedented distributions of animals that we haven't seen before. So what can we do moving forward here to solve this issue? You know, so first off, like, I absolutely sympathize with the ranchers on this issue. You know, it's challenging their livelihood, and it's costing ranchers money. Like, they're subsidizing, a few ranchers are now subsidizing heavily a sort of a public good. Most conservation issues, one, there's no silver bullet. Two, most time solutions aren't implemented, so people don't know what to do. And multiple things need to be done to sort of solve these things. And so, but I think looking at getting those ranchers the compensation they need to look after those elk, looking at habitat solutions, both adjacent to ranches on crown or public land, you know, can we benefit those landscapes in a way that they can displace some of the elk onto public land? And then thinking about what, like, getting migration back would look like. And that's not a trivial undertaking. Like, that will not just happen. You know, there's, like, people think of Flyaway Home or something where you can hop in a glider and, you know, teach a herd of, or a flock of geese to remigrate. And, like, I mean, the sky is the limit for solutions here. That might not be a solution for elk, but, like, we need to think of why are elk making these decisions? And one, we know the habitat is deteriorating under their feet, and there are predator challenges. And, you know, these elk did coexist with predators for eons, so that may or may not be actually their biggest concern. It could be a bunch of predator naive elk for 20 years that all of a sudden got predators and kind of panicked essentially and went onto the fields. But they will eventually figure out how to live with predators, because they did for centuries. But it's challenging for them to live with predators integrated habitat, where it's thick, where they're getting trapped in, you know, heavy timber areas, but elk live in big open landscapes that are productive and grassy. So we don't have a lot of those. So those would be some of my solutions. I mean, I think there's also opportunities to try, like, how do we temporarily displace these elk off ranchers' properties? There is a bunch of other habitat adjacent to these ranches. Like, it's not like these elk would starve necessarily. They could use more habitat for sure in the valley bottom, but, like, whether it's small scale hunting on those farms, especially if the ranchers could have tags of their own, so there was value in those elk to them and they had some control over what that looked like, so a hunt wasn't getting pushed on them. in the science world, we sort of lay a bunch of options out on the table, talk to stakeholders, talk to ranchers to see if they think that's a good idea or it would be silly, because they know those elk and their place better than anybody. And then you try it and you see what works and you measure outcomes, and then you rinse and repeat it and get positive outcomes. And like, I think what we need to do is just start and do something. I know that ranchers have been knocking on the door for a long time to get help, and in a lot of ways nobody's helping them. And so I think we need to just start chipping away at solutions and see what works.